this is the day that we're going to put this back on the engine. I've taken off most of the unnecessary things because this on its own weighs a lot and we're working in a very small confined space, so we want to just get this attached to the engine body first. It's going to be a lot of sweat today.
Hopefully no blood and tears.
Hopefully no blood and tears. This is the air intake. There's a filter that goes on here, then it goes into the turbo sort of thing there, and then it gets exhausted out of there. Obviously the exhaust elbow goes on there. We're working in a very small confined space, so we want to just get this attached to the engine body first and then attach the peripherals to this after the fact. As I said, very tight working space, so we're probably not going to film a lot of the actual doing. We'll film stages along the way. I think that's the easiest way to do it. Here we are looking down onto the top of the engine and the rear of the engine. As we can see, we now have the air intake, turbo unit and exhaust system, and right down here the exhaust mixing elbow, all back attached to the engine. It was a bit of a struggle. In total it took about 5 hours, and one of the biggest problems is of course getting access to some of the mounting bolts and nuts, and actually getting a spanner in there and being able to get enough turn and leverage on the spanner. I think that's probably why it took so long. There was also another little thing in the fact that this pipe here, which comes out of the heat exchanger and goes back to somewhere in the engine, I'd taken it off at one point and reattached it wrongly, because there's two outlets here. There's one down lower and there's one upper, and I'd wrongly attached this pipe to the upper connection, and that caused me a bit of confusion at the beginning because I couldn't see how I could get this pipe on with this pipe coming up here, but eventually I figured that out. So probably a good suggestion is to take photographs from every angle you can before you disassemble something as complex as this, and then it makes it easier to refer back to them when you're putting it all back together. But lesson learned there. So today I'm going to change the impeller, and I'll just show you what I'm going to do with the impeller puller as per a suggestion from one of our viewers. In an episode a couple of weeks back, I attempted to change the impeller in our engine using our brand new impeller puller, and found out that the distance between here and here was too big for me to be able to get in situ on the impeller, and also get behind the back of the starter motor, which ends up here on the engine. So one of our viewers suggested that the bar itself was slightly too long for the job, and so I could actually cut off a small section of this, which I've measured using 2 impellers. So if I cut that off there, that should give me that extra clearance at the back end here, where this butts up against the back of the starter motor. So first job, cut this little bit off and then get into the impeller housing and see if it works. Well, there's the impeller puller attached to the impeller, which you can see is sticking out just a little bit. So that little trick of cutting off a length of the threaded center piece has actually done the job. It is quite difficult to get in there because that's pretty much the only position I can get it in, and that top thumb screw really pushes against the engine block. So yeah, that's the only way I can get it in, because the little fins of the impeller actually down at the bottom, they close off so much you can't actually get the arm of the puller in there. So that's the best position I could get it. So we'll just pull the rest of that out and see what happens. Here we have the impeller still attached to the puller, and as you can see, ideally you'd like these arms to go all the way to the end and hook in there and pull it out, but unfortunately the best I could do was get it that far. But even so, if you can tighten them up, the little nubs on the end of the arms do actually dig into the rubber and get the job done. So thank you very much for that tip, that really helped me out. I'm going to inspect this one and see if there's any damage to it. Probably is after pulling it with these arms. Maybe we can keep it as a spare, but we're definitely going to replace it because it's been sat in the same position for 8 months now, and you can see how spending that much time in one position has made the arms deform into one particular angle. So maybe we won't keep this as a spare, but we're definitely going to replace it. Here you can see a side by side of the brand new replacement and the old one that's been sat in the same position for 8 months. Quite a bit of difference there. And one little tip as well, when you're putting this new one in, give it a very liberal covering with washing up liquid, and you can just pop it in by hand. So it'll slip in easy if you've got washing up liquid on it. And there is the new impeller inside the housing. All we've got to do is put the centre cap back on and then put the metal plate on the outside, and that is Bob's your uncle.
Today's the day, Baz.
Today certainly is the day. Today we are going to test run the engine while we're still on land. Now normally a marine diesel engine is cooled by raw seawater being taken in through to the system, and that goes into something called the heat exchanger, and in this heat exchanger there are pipes that kind of like touch each other, and seawater runs through half of those pipes and fresh water runs through the other half of those pipes. Eventually the seawater, when it's been heated, gets dumped out the exhaust to the back of the boat, and the cooled freshwater system just circulates back around the engine, keeping it cool. So we are now on the hard stand, so we haven't got any sea to suck in and keep the engine cool. So we're going to have to simulate that, and I'll show you what we've got set up, hopefully enough to feed the engine enough seawater. First thing we're going to do, of course, is refill the freshwater side of the system, because when we took the exhaust system off and also worked on the water heater, then all of that freshwater coolant has leaked away. It's dripped out and gone. So today, first thing to do is we're going to put 50% of this coolant, antifreeze I suppose you'd call it, and 50% of demineralized water. We're going to make a 50-50 mix, and we're going to top up the freshwater system with that. Now obviously we don't need an antifreeze on a boat that's surviving in the Mediterranean, but this antifreeze also has other properties which give protection to the freshwater system, so that's why we put it in. So we're going to mix that up first, and then we'll run through the process that we've got to hopefully make this all work okay.
Because one of the issues is that the water pressure that comes through the hose from on the ground isn't very strong, so you can't just say, oh well, let's keep it topped up. No, before anybody says, oh, why don't you just use a hose pipe?
We will be using a hose pipe.
Yeah.
We'll be using several things, as you'll see. Because the demineralized water was only 4 litres and the antifreeze is 5 litres, I'm going to now pour 4 litres of the antifreeze into the original container. And it just so happens that it actually works out to be 4 litres in there anyway.
So were we shortchanged, or have we used
I've used some of that previously. Okay, so let's pour this in here so we get a proper mix. Okay, so we now have 8 litres of a 50-50 demineralised water and antifreeze mix. Next step is to fill up the freshwater side of the system with this mixture. The plan here to supply raw water to the engine for cooling is to fill this big plastic container with water, and it will act as a header tank, and we will feed the header tank down here into the raw water intake, which is about here. We'll also have this hose pipe running from down below into there. We'll also have these 2 buckets full of water, just in case I need to dump vast amounts into the raw water intake at any one moment in time. Ansha and I will keep in touch. I mean, it's not far from here to the helm, but Ansha and I will keep in touch via walkie-talkie, and that way there can be no miscommunications when I ask her to do certain things with the forward and reverse control of the engine. So we've now got 2 litres of the freshwater side of the system filled with the fluid. Now, the water heating system on board that we worked on in the back locker in a previous video a couple of weeks ago, it heats the water by the engine. So that means that the fresh water at some point runs through 2 pipes, goes one into the hot water system, heats the hot water and comes back to the engine. Now I don't know, do those pipes get filled up now while the engine is off? Or does it wait for the engine to come up to heat temperature, then open the thermostat and then send the water to the hot water boiler to heat the hot water? If that is the case, if there is a thermostat, then at some point during this engine test I'm going to have to open up the top of that radiator filler and check the level with my finger, and if need be top up with more fresh water. So it's a bit of a balancing act down here.
So you're not going to get steam coming out of the...
No,
you're not going to burn yourself.
It's not going to be that hot.
Okay.
Here on the aft section of the starboard hull is the exhaust, so this is where the exhaust fumes come out, but this is also where the raw water that's gone through the engine and kept it cool, the raw salt water, comes out also. We're expecting, fingers crossed, to see a very good flow of water continuously pumping out of here. Hopefully I've been through this whole scenario in my head enough that I've ticked all the boxes. Objectives here today, primarily to get the engine running and keep it running for as long as possible. Number one objective is to make sure there are no air bubbles in the fuel lines and fuel system. And number two objective, if the engine is running perfectly and we can keep a good supply of water to the raw water intake, is to run the engine long enough to bring the oil up to temperature, and then when we shut down I can do an oil change and filter change as well today. So let's get on with it, eh? Alright, what I want to do is I just want to fill up the strainer, so just turn the hose pipe on a little bit. Stop! Stop!
Stop. Turned it the wrong way, sorry.
Alright, start the engine.
I'm not getting anything.
What lights have you got on?
The second one from the right comes on and then goes off, and then the one on the right, and then that's it. Would that be a battery?
No.
All I'm doing is turning the key, aren't I?
Yeah, fully turn the key.
Yeah.
So it goes beep and then you turn it.
Yeah. Let's do it again. Yeah.
Bollocks. Well, we've run into a situation. We're not getting any power to the starter motor by the sounds of things, so we're going to have to check that out. Okay, just to bring you up to speed, I've had a little bit of a mess around with the solenoid on the starter motor, basically just disconnecting the cables, cleaning them up and putting them back on. I did a little start with the engine and it began to turn over. So rather than bugger around with that header tank, we've actually just got the hose pipe outside the companionway steps running over the cockpit deck. So that's ready for me here when I need it. So we're going to go for the test now. Alright, fire her up. Is there water coming out of the exhaust?
Yes, I was filming it. It's coming out.
Say again.
Yes.
Okay, switch it off. I'm going to count that as a win. The engine runs. To say that hearing the sound of that engine turnover was such a relief is minimising the whole feeling that was and thoughts that were going through my head. I actually feel like crying now. It's such a relief. Anyway, we got a shit ton of fresh water all inside the boat. But I don't care, it's fresh water. It'll either evaporate or get mopped up. So the engine works, so we can now splash with confidence. Oil change. Because of the way I had to keep feeding water into the system, I think I'll leave the oil change until we're actually in the water and I can let the engine run properly and bring the oil up to temperature and then change the water. So that is excellent news and a huge step forward. There are no leaks of oil or water from the system that we've reattached to the engine, which is great. only one little boat bite, which is not too bad, considering all the shit that was going down in a very short space of time.
Can I just say, I'm so proud of you, because it was, the whole thing has been like huge, like there have been so many things that we discovered. I'm all emotional. Been so many things that we discovered that needed to be fixed along the way, and they were all big, huge things that even Baz hadn't seen before, and he's like just done it all and he's put it back together. Well done.
I don't care what time of the day it is, I'm going to have a beer now. In fact, I might have two.
And I don't care about the amount of carbs I'm going to have as well.
Alright,
okay.
We'll get this lot cleared up and then we'll move on to the next job on the list. Thanks for being there, folks. Just to bring you up to speed with what I did down here off camera while I needed two hands. This green plastic container is our expansion tank, and previously the bracket that it was on faced down here and the expansion tank was here and visually in the way of the solenoid and starter motor, which is there. So I thought, well, I'll take this opportunity to turn the bracket around and put the tank up there, which actually works out better because this expansion tank is for when the water gets hot in here and expands up and out and comes into the expansion tank. When this tank was down here, it actually used to fill up and then overflow, and all the crap used to leak all over the gubbins here. Now it's higher up, it shouldn't do that. Anyway, moving on to the solenoid. Here is the negative connection for the solenoid, and this big red cable comes up here and connects to the solenoid there. These three cables coming off are just taking 12 volts to other little bits and pieces around the boat, so they're not really that necessary. So what I did was I disconnected the negative, cleaned up the spade connector, put it back, disconnected the positive, cleaned up all the connections, put it back. So a huge leap forward, and now it's definitely time for beer. Cheers. Oh, nectar.
Wow, that's been on your mind for 8 months, hasn't it?
Near enough, yeah. Because we took the rusted through exhaust elbow off the first month that we got here, and we thought
that was just the issue.
We'd just take that off, replace that, and that'd be it. And yeah, it's taken 8 months of thinking, planning, figuring out where to get the parts, getting parts delivered, putting it all back together and making sure that there were no leftover screws or bolts or hose clamps or anything, and then switching it on and hoping it works.
And I remember, because there was such a big gap between taking it apart and then waiting for all the parts and then putting it together, I remember Baz saying once, well, more than once, I just hope that I remember where all the screws go and what order everything goes in, because I haven't done this, I haven't rebuilt an inboard diesel engine before.
But it was also the fact that there were like 5 big jobs all going on at once, and they were all disassembled, and all the parts were kind of like in plastic bags and stuck on shelves next to or near where the job was happening. And you know, it was like, okay, so I've taken that off, I can see it's rusted and broken, so I need to order one of them. So that will go into another pile on the ordering pile, because we had the courier. I mean, Athens is only 2.5–3 hours away.
Yeah.
You know, on a good day you could probably see it from here.
Well.
You throw stones at it. But the thing is, you know, you order one small part for €20, it's going to cost you €5 in a courier. So it was a question of going, well, let's open all these jobs up, see what bits are needed, then find out where we can order the bits from, and try and order as many as we can from one place and get them all couriered over at once. So there was logistics of that as well, which caused a lot of delay in a lot of the jobs.
Let's not mention speedos with the cutlass bearing, but you will have seen all of that.
Yeah. So I think, I don't even know what time it is. What time is it?
I have no idea. 11:16.
11:15, okay. I think...
I was so nervous.
I think we should maybe clean the deck today.
Yeah, that'd be a good idea. And then just splash tomorrow.
Because it's hot.
Never mind the rest of the anti-fouling or anything like that.
So I think we should clean the deck today, and that way we can then do the anti-fouling, the last of the anti-fouling, because it'll all be dry by tomorrow. Start putting things away, because there are a lot of things out that should be stowed. Yeah,
we're treating this like a house at the moment, so everything is out as you would have it in your kitchen or whatever. And I've got to put some resin on the keel bolt.
Okay.
Well, okay.
That is most of the major bits done. Now a lot of it's just cosmetic and
doing the stainless steel and
cleaning and just little fiddly bits.
Yeah.
Things those are the sort of things that we can do at anchor, really.
Yes. Yeah.
So we really just want to get in the water. It's now the 2nd of July. So I might speak to Harris later and see if we can get put on the sled so that we can do the bits of the hull and keel that have been on the blocks and the prop stands.
Oh my god, I was so nervous. I was so, like all I had to do was turn the engine on and turn it off. But I was so nervous for the whole process because because it could have just gone really wrong.
Yeah.
And it didn't. Well done, love.
Yeah. All right, peeps.
Hey, Baz, do you fancy doing an outro for me?
Yeah, sure. In next week's episode of Sailing ABC, we put the anchor chain back into the locker and the anchor back on the bow. We also get put onto the trailer in the yard and do some last minute anti-fouling, including the waterline and the leading edges. So if you're not already a subscriber, make sure to click the subscribe button and the bell icon so that you get notified when we release a brand new episode of Sailing ABC. Stay safe out there.